So some people think that God asking Abraham to kill his son is a little over the top. Like, really killing him? What would you say to people that are asking tough questions like this from the Old Testament, where God is telling people to wipe out nations, or specifically, like, God's telling you to kill your own son? Like, how do you respond to this?
Yeah, I'll do the Abraham question first, or primarily. I feel the same way. Someone says, this feels like it's over the top to me. I feel the same way. Alex, you know both of my boys, and to think about ever taking them up and killing them, I mean, just, it's so abhorrent that I can't even imagine doing it. I can't imagine being in Abraham's place for that. And then Abraham has the layer of waiting till he was an old man to have a baby. He's the child of promise. It's his only son. I mean, the barriers for that to happen are ridiculous and stomach-turning, to be quite honest. So, in fact, when I was in college, I think it was my junior year, I had kind of a serious crisis of faith around this. Like, what kind of a God would ask Abraham to do that? And what was in Abraham's mind that he actually would do it? And interestingly, my InterVarsity staff member pointed out that there's a passage in the book of Hebrews that says Abraham did it because he knew that God could raise the dead. And you go, okay, if it's in your mindset that God's asking me to go through something that's not going to be final, but there's a resurrection that's on the other side of it, then you could see it being at least palatable. And Abraham's a guy who is known for faith, and if his faith was at that level, that he really believed, and remember, he's walking in the darkness on everything. He doesn't have 4,000 years of history of God's interaction with people to bank on. He's just going step by step by what God tells him to do next. If he had the kind of level of faith that he believed that Isaac would be able to raise from the dead, well, that puts it in a different kind of a category, a different type of a perspective. But here's something that I love about it. Because God saved Isaac in that moment, because God told Abraham, no, you are not to sacrifice your only son, it became a precedent for the people of Israel that distinguished them from every other nation around them. So you see other nations around them that have Molech or Chemoth or other gods to which you would sacrifice your children. The Jewish people had a never again moment with Isaac, in that when God stopped Isaac, from that point forward, you are not to put your children to death. You are not to throw your children in the fire. It got encoded in Moses' law, but it was practiced before it was encoded that your kids are not designed for sacrifice, and God never wants that. So for the people of Israel, this was a key moment that set them apart as different from every nation that was around them. And God's long-term agenda for them was a beautiful agenda. And then, of course, as Christians, we look back on the symbolism of that. There's a God who loves us so much who would sacrifice his only son on our behalf. And it gives us that emotive, stomach-churning moment, like, I can't imagine that God would love us so much that he would watch his son go through that kind of a pain. And then the substitution of the ram, of course, is a symbol of the substitution of Jesus, who died on our behalf and who took the knife for us.
Yeah. And I think back to that story in the Hebrews passage, and it seems like Abraham had seen dead come to life before. Maybe not physically, but he has reasons for faith because he had seen a dead barren womb, which was his wife, come to life. And so I think he had reasons for... He had seen, he was past his prime and probably ability to produce children, and he had seen, God even, God revived that, and so I think there's reasons of God moving his faith towards that level through miracles before. Obviously, Christians pro-life. There's this idea of being pro-life and wanting to protect the sanctity of life and things like that. But then we have an Old Testament God who, even after this Abraham story, ends up killing a bunch of babies, So we think of the Passover, which was just celebrated, and he said, your punishment, if you don't, paint blood over the doorpost, is going to be, I'm going to kill the firstborn. So why is it okay for us to protect this sanctity of life, even though God, obviously, in the Old Testament, isn't as passionate about it?
Great question. And I think it goes back to, there's a general question about the sanctity of life, which applies to the Egypt example. It also applies to Joshua going in and killing every man, woman, and child in the promised land. I mean, that's a huge sanctity of life kind of a question. And why is it legit for God to do it or for God to command people to do it? One of the things I like to point out is that an artist has the ability to do what he wants with the art that he creates. So let's just say, Alex, you created a beautiful painting of something, beautiful painting of a sunset. If you wanted to just take that and crush it over your knee and throw it in the garbage can, you could, because you're the artist, you made it. But if I walked into your house, grabbed your painting, crushed it over my knee, and put it in the garbage can, that would be a transgression. That would be against your rightful, your right to do what you want with your art. And anything that you create, basically the creator can create it or he can destroy it. Well, if you apply that to human lives, God has the ability to create or destroy lives whenever he wants to, because he is the artist. He's the creator who's behind it all. So the moral right of God to do it is different than the human right for us to be able to take one another's lives. And the sanctity of life is around the holiness of life that God has given. Well, if God has given, God can take away. If God has given, it's not our right to be the ones who take it away. In fact, I would contend that God takes every life. And whether that life is taken through disease or old age or war or cancer or anything, God knows the number of days that somebody has, and every life ends. And some lives end shorter and some lives end longer. You know, if you go back to the ancient world, you know, people were living 30, 40, 50 years, maybe tops. Me, I'm already rocking 55, and I'm anticipating another 30 or 40 more. So our long lifespan is actually abnormal in the human world as it is at this point. So you can make an argument that God takes every life, and God has the right to take any life at any point that he wants to, because he's God and he's the one who's the creator behind it. So whatever we're talking about, there is a different moral purpose behind or that undergirds how God deals with people's lives than human beings.
You just answered two questions right there, because someone asked how old Mark Ashton is. So you just
there we
answered
go.
that. Way to go.
Yeah, double nickels.